During World War II, the intensity of the conflict and the economic strain it caused led to unimaginable hardship for civilians in many parts of Europe, especially in Germany. The war devastated cities, destroyed infrastructure, and created severe shortages of essential resources. In Germany, by the time the war was nearing its end, the country had been subjected to years of bombing raids, occupation, and economic collapse. The currency, once a symbol of national pride and power, became virtually worthless in the face of hyperinflation, food scarcity, and the collapse of everyday life. It was during this time, in the midst of dire circumstances, that people began burning money for warmth. While this may seem like an act of desperation or an unusual choice to some, it was the grim reality for many who had little else left to rely on for survival. As the war progressed, Germany faced a series of increasingly difficult challenges. The Allied bombing campaigns had decimated much of the nation's infrastructure. Factories that once produced goods were now rubble, railways were destroyed, and even food supplies were interrupted. In the cities, people had to live with the constant threat of air raids, and the bitter cold winters only made life more unbearable. Fuel, particularly coal and wood, was in short supply, and the government struggled to provide the basic necessities for the population. By 1944 and 1945, the situation had worsened to such an extent that many households found themselves unable to heat their homes or cook food. In the face of these shortages, people had to make difficult decisions. While food and fuel were essential for survival, they had become so scarce that many had to go without. The government issued ration cards for food, but even those did not guarantee access to basic sustenance. As the value of the German Reichsmark plummeted due to inflation, money itself became less useful. The marks that were once used to buy food, clothing, or firewood were now insufficient to meet the demands of daily life. As a result, the currency began to lose its meaning. People no longer saw money as a means of survival, but as something they could discard in favor of more immediate needs, such as warmth. With the scarcity of traditional fuels like coal and firewood, some people in the cities turned to alternative sources for heat. In the absence of usable wood or other materials, burning money became a practical, albeit tragic, solution. Banknotes, which had been printed in huge quantities during the war and were readily available, were burned in stoves and fireplaces to provide much-needed heat. The Reichsmark, once a symbol of Germany's economic might, now symbolized the desperation of a population willing to burn it for the basic human need of warmth. The decision to burn money was not made lightly. It was a last resort when every other option had been exhausted. While the act of burning money may seem shocking to those who view currency as a valuable asset, it made sense in a time of such scarcity. The marks were worth so little that people had to find a way to stay warm without the luxury of choice. For those who lived in bombed-out areas or in cities where supplies were limited, the reality of everyday life meant finding any source of heat they could, even if it meant using what little money they had left. The physical warmth provided by burning money was a temporary comfort, but it allowed people to survive the freezing temperatures of winter and made the difference between life and death for some. In a society in which normal economic transactions had broken down, currency was no longer the means by which people navigated daily life. Instead, it became just another commodity to be used in the struggle for survival. This act of burning money during the war can also be seen as a symbol of the collapse of the traditional economic system. Inflation in Germany had spiraled out of control as the war dragged on. The government printed vast amounts of money to fund the war effort, but this led to hyperinflation, where the value of the currency decreased drastically. By the end of the war, the Reichsmark had become nearly worthless, unable to purchase even the most basic goods and services. People found that the money they held in their hands had little real value, yet it could still be used in a practical way to provide warmth and a momentary escape from the freezing cold. In this sense, burning money became a stark reminder of the failure of the economic system and the devastating consequences of a nation at war. The desperation felt by the German people in the final years of the war was not unique to them. It was a situation shared by civilians in many war-torn nations. However, the specific circumstances in Germany, including the economic collapse and the scarcity of resources, made burning money for warmth a particularly poignant and widespread phenomena. The trauma of war, the loss of family members, the destruction of homes, and the inability to provide for basic needs created a sense of hopelessness among the population. The war, which had started with promises of national glory, had become a struggle for basic survival, and the burning of money was one of the many ways in which people tried to adapt to a world where everything they had once known was falling apart. The act of burning money for warmth also spoke to the psychological toll the war had on the people. It was not just a physical battle for resources, it was a mental and emotional struggle as well. The constant fear of bombings, the loss of loved ones, and the deprivation of essential goods had a profound impact on the psyche of the civilian population. Money, which had once been seen as a symbol of stability, now became a mere object to be discarded when its original purpose had been rendered obsolete. This shift in perception reflected the deepening trauma and the disintegration of the traditional social and economic structures that had once held society together. In a world where everything seemed to be collapsing, burning money for warmth became a symbol of the breakdown of order and the desperate search for any means of comfort, no matter how fleeting. For the survivors of the war, the memories of burning money would remain a haunting reminder of the hardships they endured. Many were left with little more than the clothes on their backs, and the memories of a world that had once been normal. The destruction of homes, the disintegration of families, and the economic collapse had left people with little to hold on to except for the basic human instinct to survive. Burning money for warmth was just one of the many ways in which people tried to endure the unimaginable circumstances of war, but it remains a powerful symbol of the lengths to which people will go when faced with the most extreme situations. Thank you for engaging with the content. If you're interested in more insightful stories, historical narratives, or other topics, feel free to subscribe and stay updated with our latest content.